Welcome to A Nurse's Warning, a tale where fate, power, and love collide in the most unexpected of places. Imagine this: a billionaire confined to a hospital bed, stripped of his empire's control, and a nurse who sees only the man behind the fortune. But when a mysterious warning shatters their fragile connection, secrets unravel, and lives are forever changed. What was the warning, and how could it alter everything? Stay tuned, you won't believe where this story leads. The early morning light filtered softly through the blinds of a private hospital room, casting a calm glow on William Harris as he lay resting. A 48-year-old billionaire and founder of a renowned hospital chain, William was a very image of success: sharp suits, a meticulously maintained life, and a steady hold on his empire. But today, all his powers seemed insignificant as he faced a reality he couldn't control: a sudden heart attack that had left him unexpectedly vulnerable. He found himself, ironically, a patient in one of his own hospitals, at the mercy of doctors, nurses, and the quiet hours of forced rest. His peace was soon interrupted by the sound of the door opening. He turned his head, somewhat reluctantly, expecting yet another routine check by the medical staff. But the figure who entered was different. Laura Bennett, a nurse in her early 40s, stepped into the room, her presence exuding a calm competence. Tall, with an unassuming elegance, she moved with the assuredness of someone dedicated to her role. Her eyes, a steady shade of hazel, flickered to the machines as she approached him with a gentle smile. She had no idea who he was, and that anonymity struck William as both peculiar and refreshing. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," she greeted him in a warm, professional tone as she went about checking the monitors around his bed. "How are you feeling today?" There was no flattery in her voice, no sense of reverence he had become so accustomed to. Instead, she simply saw him as another patient in need of care. It was both humbling and oddly comforting for him. Clearing his throat, he replied, "A bit trapped, honestly. Not used to staying in bed for so long." A slight smile tugged at her lips and she nodded, finishing up her checks. "That sounds about right for someone used to being in charge. But rest is essential now, Mr. Harris. Don't try to rush it. Believe me, your heart will thank you for the time you give it." The simplicity of her words surprised him. Her tone was firm but gentle, carrying an ease and patience he had rarely encountered. Usually, his wealth and influence spoke first, dictating the terms of his interactions. But here, stripped of all that, he felt himself disarmed. Laura treated him with the same care and respect she would give anyone else. For once, he was just William. Laura continued with her routine, adjusting his foreline and asking him about any discomfort he might be experiencing. William found himself observing her more closely. The way she spoke, the steadiness of her hands, even the rhythm of her breathing, all spoke of someone who had dedicated her life to this work. He realized, to his surprise, that he admired it. She was grounded, sincere, entirely different from the fast-paced, superficial world he had spent his life navigating. Over the next few days, as Laura became his primary nurse, William found himself looking forward to her visits. He was captivated by her straightforward manner and unpretentious warmth. She didn't linger unnecessarily, nor did she ignore him. Every interaction felt balanced, leaving him with the unusual sense of being truly seen. For the first time in years, he felt as though he could simply be himself, without the weight of expectations or responsibilities. Their conversations began to drift beyond the usual medical updates. She would share small anecdotes about her life as a nurse, the joys, the challenges, and sometimes the sorrow of working in healthcare. William listened intently, feeling his curiosity deepen with each passing day. He discovered that Laura had an innate compassion for people, one that went beyond her duties. It was in the way she remembered her patients, the little details she noticed about them. She told stories of patients who had touched her heart and others who had taught her invaluable lessons. And yet, as she shared these glimpses into her world, William sensed a reserved side to her, a quiet distance that kept him intrigued. He wanted to know more, to understand what had shaped her into the person she was. The thought surprised him. He hadn't felt this genuine interest in someone in years. One evening, as the hospital quieted, Laura arrived to check on him once again. This time, they fell into a conversation that lingered longer than usual. William spoke about his childhood, his early dreams, and the hardships he had faced building his empire. Though he didn't reveal everything, the simple act of sharing personal memories felt almost cathartic. Laura listened with a patient attentiveness, her warm gaze steady on his, a soft smile in the corners of her lips as she absorbed his story. As they talked, he found himself wondering what she might think if she knew the full truth of who he was. He had built an empire, amassed wealth beyond imagination, yet here he was, sharing simple moments with a nurse who didn't see any of that. And that, he realized, was part of the magic. With Laura, he was just a man, and for some reason, he wanted to stay that way, if only for a little while longer. The following morning, he awoke early, looking forward to her first visit. There was a new lightness in his spirit, a subtle sense of anticipation. Yet, there was also an undercurrent of anxiety. How long could he sustain this anonymity? How much longer could he keep her in the dark, letting her believe he was just another patient? The thought weighed on him, and he knew that sooner or later, he would have to tell her the truth. But for now, he chose to savor the simplicity of their connection. Each moment they shared was like a small rebellion against his usual life, a glimpse into something pure and uncalculated. Little did he know, though, that Laura was starting to notice things, details that made her question his story. The subtle hints in his speech, the occasional flash of intensity in his eyes. There was something about him that didn't quite fit. As Laura left his room after her morning check, she paused outside his door, feeling an inexplicable sense of curiosity. She was drawn to William, not just as a patient but as a person. And though she had no idea of the secrets he was hiding, something told her there was more to this man than he was letting on. For both William and Laura, an unexpected journey was unfolding. Days turned into weeks, and William found himself looking forward to each moment spent with Laura. She entered his room each morning with the same calm, unhurried demeanor, bringing a wave of peacefulness with her. It was unlike anything he'd experienced in years. William had always been surrounded by people who either idolized him for his wealth or feared him for his power. Yet Laura saw him through different eyes, with a kindness he rarely encountered. To her, he was simply William, another patient to care for, a man in need of healing. One day, as she adjusted his medication, Laura glanced at him with a hint of curiosity in her eyes. "So, William," she began, her tone light but warm, "you seem like someone who's used to being in charge. Do you miss it? The control, I mean?" William, momentarily caught off guard, smiled. It was the first time she'd asked him anything personal, and he was glad for it. "Control has been my constant companion for most of my life," he replied, a note of introspection in his voice. "But maybe that's the problem. Sometimes, letting go feels more freeing than holding on." Laura's smile was one of understanding. "Well, here, you get to rest. No one's expecting you to control anything." She finished adjusting the monitors, and as she worked, she hummed softly, her voice adding another layer of calm to the room. William noticed how the simple sound seemed to melt away the stress he usually carried. He hadn't realized how accustomed he was to the weight of constant pressure until it was no longer there. In these quiet moments, a connection was forming between them. They spoke about small things, daily routines, fleeting observations. Laura shared little stories about her work, funny anecdotes about patients who had brightened her day, and reflections on the challenges of nursing. It was a life so far removed from his own, but one he found increasingly fascinating. Her world was built on compassion and dedication, while his had been carved by ambition and competition. For the first time, William wondered if there might be more to life than his relentless pursuit of success. One afternoon, their conversation took a deeper turn. Laura, in a rare display of vulnerability, mentioned the sacrifices she had made for her career. The long hours, missed family gatherings, and relationships that never quite seemed to work out. Sometimes, I wonder what life would have been like if I'd chosen differently, she confessed, her voice carrying a tinge of regret. William felt a pang in his chest. He understood all too well the price of ambition. Life has a way of making us choose, doesn't it? He said softly. And sometimes, we don't realize the cost until we've already paid it. Laura looked at him, her eyes searching his face as though seeing him for the first time. In that moment, she sensed a depth in William that she hadn't fully understood before. There was a history in his gaze, a quiet sadness that echoed her own experiences. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in thought, and William felt his heart stir with a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years' connection. Their relationship, though unspoken, was beginning to mean something to him. He was no longer just a patient. He was a man rediscovering what it meant to truly connect with another person. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd built a life of solitude at the top, only to find comfort in the simplicity of this unexpected bond. Each time Laura left his room, he felt her absence, like a small void that only she could fill. And each time she returned, he felt his spirits lift. But as much as he cherished these moments, a sense of unease began to settle within him. He knew that eventually he would have to leave, and the thought troubled him more than he wanted to admit. Part of him wanted to stay in this sanctuary of anonymity, where he could just be William without the weight of his last name. Yet, another part of him feared that his silence might hurt Laura in the end. She deserved to know who he truly was, and he dreaded the moment when he would have to tell her. One evening, after an especially quiet day, Laura brought him his evening medication and paused, looking thoughtful. "William," she began slowly, "have you ever thought about what you'd do if you could start over? If you could leave everything behind and just be?" Her question lingered in the air, and William felt its weight. He had never considered that possibility, not seriously. His life had been a series of goals, all carefully planned and achieved. Yet here with Laura, he found himself longing for something he couldn't quite name. Before he could respond, she smiled softly and shook her head. "Never mind. It's silly, really." But her words stayed with him long after she left the room. The idea of starting over, of breaking free from the confines of his own creation, stirred something deep within him. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, and as he lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, he wondered if perhaps, for the first time, he was beginning to understand what he truly wanted. The next morning, William was greeted by Laura's warm smile as she entered the room, as though the previous night's conversation hadn't happened. But William knew that something had changed within him, and perhaps between them. He could no longer ignore the pull he felt toward her, the growing desire to know her beyond the confines of patient and nurse. And yet, the lingering question remained. Could he trust her with the truth of who he was, or would revealing it shatter this fragile, newfound connection? The days that followed were marked by an unspoken tension between William and Laura. Their conversations remained light, but beneath the surface, there was a growing intensity that both felt yet neither acknowledged. William could sense Laura's curiosity about him. The way her eyes lingered on him just a moment too long, or the occasional thoughtful pauses in their exchanges hinted that she was starting to wonder who he really was. He knew his time of anonymity was running out, yet he was reluctant to end it. One afternoon, as Laura entered with her usual warmth, William decided to push the boundaries of their conversation. "Laura," he began with a hint of hesitation, "have you ever thought about what you'd be doing if you weren't here, working in this hospital every day?" She looked at him, momentarily surprised by the question. "Honestly, I don't know," she admitted, her gaze drifting toward the window. "I love my work, but there's a part of me that wonders if there's more out there. You know, a different path." Her response struck a chord with William. He had spent so long climbing the ladder of success that he rarely considered the simplicity of life's other possibilities. Laura's answer reminded him of the choices he had made, ones that had shaped him but also chained him to a life of relentless ambition. "Maybe it's not about where you are," he said quietly, But who you're with that makes all the difference. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, a new depth of understanding emerged between them. Laura's interest in William deepened as she began to see past the image of a simple patient. There was something in his words, a hidden weight that spoke of a life filled with experiences, with stories he wasn't sharing. And yet, she felt honored by the pieces of himself he was willing to reveal. She sensed a vulnerability in him that mirrored her own hidden insecurities, and this unexpected kinship drew her closer. Her professional boundaries felt increasingly blurred, and it unsettled her. Laura had always prided herself on her dedication to her work, but with William, she found herself wanting to be more than just his nurse. The growing tension between them came to a head one evening when Laura caught him gazing at her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "What?" she asked, a shy smile breaking through despite herself. William's usual composure faltered for a moment. "Nothing," he replied, but his voice carried a softness that contradicted his words. The quietness between them felt charged, as though the very air in the room held secrets waiting to be spoken. Laura felt her cheeks warm, her mind racing with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. As she left his room that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the edge of something significant, something that could change everything. But William's silence on his background left her wondering if she truly knew the man behind the calm facade. She began to suspect that he was hiding more than he let on. Every time she thought she glimpsed a hint of his true self, he would withdraw, leaving her with more questions than answers. She couldn't decide if she was intrigued or frustrated, but either way, she knew she was in too deep to walk away. The next morning, William sensed a change in her demeanor. She was friendly as ever, but there was a new distance in her gaze, as if she were guarding herself. He couldn't blame her. He had intentionally held back the truth. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that if he told her everything, he might lose her. For so long, his wealth and power had been shields, keeping others at bay and ensuring he remained in control. But with Laura, he felt a vulnerability that made him question his own walls. He began to wonder if there was any way to bridge the growing gap between them without tearing down the life he had so carefully built. Determined to reconnect with her, William found himself sharing more pieces of his story. He spoke about his early struggles, his relentless climb to the top, and the loneliness that often accompanied success. Laura listened, captivated by his openness, yet aware that he was still holding back something crucial. There was an emptiness in his voice, a silent ache that resonated with her own fears of a life unfulfilled. She began to understand that, beneath his strength, William was a man searching for meaning beyond the walls he had built around himself. As the day went on, Laura found herself feeling torn. Her attraction to William had blossomed into something deeper, a genuine desire to understand and support him. Yet, the mystery surrounding his life left her with an unease she couldn't ignore. She didn't want to be another person in his life who was kept at a distance, a mere spectator to his guarded world. But the uncertainty of what revealing his secrets would mean for them both held her back. She feared that the truth could destroy the connection they had built so carefully. That evening, as she finished her shift, Laura caught herself pausing outside his door, hesitating to enter. Part of her wanted to confront him, to ask him directly about his past, but another part wanted to preserve the delicate balance they had created. When she finally stepped inside, she noticed a flicker of relief in his eyes, as if he had been waiting for her. She realized then that he was just as unsure of their future as she was, and that thought comforted her. As they exchanged a few final words that night, the sense of unfinished business lingered between them. Neither of them spoke of it, but they both knew that a decision was looming. William couldn't continue to hide his true self, and Laura couldn't keep pretending she didn't notice the cracks in his story. They had reached a crossroads, and both sensed that whatever lay ahead would define the path they were about to take, together or apart. It was a bright afternoon when everything changed. Laura was finishing up her rounds when she overheard two colleagues discussing William. "You know, he's not just a patient," one of them whispered. "He's William Harris. the William Harris. He owns this entire hospital chain. Laura froze, her heart pounding. She'd known there was something different about him, but she hadn't imagined this. The pieces began to fall into place. His measured words, the mysterious way he avoided certain questions, and the intense sadness in his eyes. Suddenly, everything made sense. Trying to maintain her composure, Laura completed her tasks before heading to his room. Her mind raced with questions, doubts, and, most troubling of all, a sense of betrayal. She knocked softly before entering, her expression controlled, though she couldn't hide the tension in her shoulders. William looked up, sensing her unease instantly. "Laura," he greeted her warmly, but his smile faded as he noticed the seriousness in her gaze. "William," she began, her voice steady but laced with hurt. "Is it true? Are you the owner of this hospital?" His silence was answer enough. He looked down, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "Yes," he admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am." She took a step back, her mind struggling to reconcile the man she'd grown close to with the powerful, wealthy figure she now knew him to be. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, hurt and confusion mixing in her voice. William took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I didn't want to be defined by it," he said, his gaze fixed on her, pleading for understanding. "For once, I just wanted to be seen as a person, not as a name or a fortune. I wanted to experience what it felt like to be treated as just another patient." His confession hung in the air, and Laura found herself caught between anger and empathy. She could understand his reasoning, but it didn't erase the sting of his deception. "Do you have any idea how difficult it is to care for someone without knowing who they really are?" Laura's words cut through the silence, her frustration spilling over. "I thought I knew you, William. I thought we had built something real, something honest." He winced, the pain evident in his eyes. "We did, Laura," he insisted softly. "My feelings for you are real. The connection we have, it's not a lie." She wanted to believe him, but trust had been broken, and the gap between them felt wider than ever. I don't know if I can just accept this," she whispered, looking away. "I need time to think, to understand why you kept this from me." She turned to leave, her steps heavy, and William felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. He knew he'd made a mistake, one that could cost him the very thing he'd come to cherish most. Over the next few days, Laura kept her distance, struggling to process the revelation. She missed their easy conversations, the quiet moments that had brought her comfort, but doubt clouded her heart. Had she been just another experiment for him, a way to feel normal in his extraordinary life? The thought haunted her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been deceived. Meanwhile, William wrestled with his own regret. He realized now that he had underestimated Laura, that she deserved honesty from the beginning. Every moment spent without her felt hollow, and he longed for a chance to explain himself fully. Desperation began to seep into his thoughts, and he resolved to find a way to make things right. But could he convince her to look past his mistake? One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, William wrote a letter. He poured his heart onto the page, recounting his struggles, his fears, and the loneliness that had driven him to seek a simpler connection. "I know I made a mistake," he wrote, "and I can't undo the past. But please believe me when I say that you mean more to me than any title or wealth ever could." He left the letter with a nurse, hoping it would reach her and that somehow it would bridge the chasm he had created. When Laura read his words the next morning, a soft wave of emotion washed over her. She could sense his sincerity in each line, his vulnerability laid bare. It was a side of him she hadn't fully seen before, and it stirred something deep within her. Still, the pain lingered, and she wondered if she could truly let go of the betrayal she felt. The choice before her was daunting, and as she folded the letter, she realized that she was standing at a crossroads. Later that day, she found herself outside his room, hesitating before stepping inside. William looked up as she entered, his eyes filled with a cautious hope. "I got your letter," she said softly, holding it tightly in her hand. And I believe you, but this isn't easy for me. You kept a huge part of yourself hidden and that hurt." He nodded, the weight of her words evident on his face. "I know, Laura. I can't change what I did, but I want to be honest with you from now on. No more secrets." They stood in silence, the distance between them slowly shrinking. "I'm willing to try," Laura finally said, her voice barely audible. "But I need you to meet me halfway. I need you to trust me enough to let me into your world completely." William felt a sense of relief, mixed with a newfound determination. He realized that if he wanted her in his life, he would have to let go of his defenses and embrace the vulnerability he had always feared. As they parted that evening, there was an understanding between them, fragile yet undeniable. But beneath the tentative reconciliation, a new question loomed in Laura's mind. Was she prepared to step into his world with all the complexities it entailed? And could they truly build something real from a foundation that had started with secrets? In the quiet of the hospital room, both of them sensed that they were just beginning a journey, one that would demand honesty, trust, and above all, courage. The days after their conversation passed in a delicate balance of tentative reconnection and lingering uncertainty. Laura and William had both taken a step toward rebuilding trust, but the cracks from his hidden identity remained. Though they shared small moments, an exchange of glances, a warm smile here and there, they each felt the weight of the unresolved distance between them. Laura, though grateful for William's honesty, couldn't shake the doubt that had taken root in her heart. She needed space to understand if she could truly embrace this new reality. William, on the other hand, found himself in unfamiliar territory. For years, he had relied on control and power to navigate his life, but now he was faced with something beyond his influence. Laura's decision to trust him again. He sensed her hesitation, a cautiousness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. It stung, but he knew he couldn't force her to accept his past or his status. If he wanted Laura in his life, he would have to let her come to terms with it in her own time. Patience, he realized, was not a luxury he could buy. One afternoon, as Laura sat in the hospital break room, her mind wandered back to William. She couldn't deny the warmth that had blossomed between them, nor the pull she felt toward him. Yet the complexity of their relationship troubled her. She'd spent years dedicating herself to her work, building a life around simplicity and compassion. William's world was different, filled with power, influence, and the inevitable scrutiny that came with wealth. She found herself wondering if she was prepared to live in the shadow of his world, or if it would eventually eclipse the person she was. Her thoughts were interrupted by a fellow nurse who mentioned in passing, "I heard Mr. Harris is considering stepping back from work for a while. They say he's rethinking a lot since the heart attack." The comment made Laura pause. Had her presence in his life contributed to this shift? She felt a mixture of curiosity and guilt, worried that her feelings might be clouding her judgment. At that moment, she resolved to have an honest conversation with William, to clear the air and understand where they truly stood. That evening, she visited his room, finding him sitting by the window, lost in thought. The setting sun cast a warm glow across his face, softening the sharpness of his features. He looked up as she entered, and a genuine smile broke through his contemplative expression. "Laura," he greeted, his tone a mix of relief and anticipation. She took a seat across from him, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "William," she began slowly, "I need to understand something. Are you really thinking about stepping back from work? And is it because of me?" William's expression shifted, a hint of vulnerability showing as he considered her question. "Yes, I am," he admitted. "But it's not just because of you. Being here, facing my own mortality, it's made me question a lot. My life has been driven. Success, power, control. They've consumed everything. And now, I'm not sure that's enough anymore." His words touched something deep within Laura. She saw a man who, despite his accomplishments, was searching for meaning, for something real that went beyond his status. And yet, she felt a pang of caution. "William, I appreciate your honesty, but I have to be clear, I'm not asking you to change your life for me. I don't want to be a reason for you to abandon what you've built." He shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not doing this because you asked, Laura. I'm doing this because, for the first time, I feel like I want to build something different. I want to live a life that means something beyond just wealth and success." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Laura felt a sense of relief. He wasn't placing his decisions on her shoulders. He was making choices for himself. Choices that aligned with the person he wanted to become. Still, doubt lingered. She couldn't ignore the reality of his world or the challenges they would face. But as she sat there, listening to him open up, she felt her own walls begin to soften. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, as they both seemed to instinctively seek some reprieve from the intensity of the moment. They laughed over stories from their pasts, her tales of hospital mishaps and his of corporate misadventures. The easy flow between them returned, a reminder of the connection they'd once shared so effortlessly. And though there was still tension, there was also an unspoken hope, a possibility that, despite the obstacles, they could find a way forward. As the evening grew late, Laura rose to leave, and William walked her to the door. She turned to him, a question hovering on her lips. "William, can I ask you something?" He nodded, his expression open. "If we try to make this work, do you really think we can find a balance? Between our worlds, I mean." He didn't answer right away, considering her words carefully. Finally, he said, "I think we can if we're both willing to meet each other halfway." His answer, though simple, carried a weight that resonated deeply with Laura. It was a promise, a commitment to work through the challenges together, if they both chose to take that step. She gave him a soft smile, feeling a cautious optimism take root. "Good night, William," she whispered, and he returned the sentiment, watching her disappear down the hallway, feeling as though they were on the cusp of something fragile and profound. As Laura walked away, she found herself wondering if her fears were worth setting aside. She felt the stirrings of hope, tempered by the knowledge that a relationship with William would demand sacrifices. Yet, for the first time, she felt that those sacrifices might be worth it. When she arrived home, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that the choices she made now would shape everything that lay ahead. Could she trust in their connection enough to face the unknown? Laura spent the next few days reflecting on her conversation with William. Her heart felt lighter, but questions still lingered. Could she truly step into his world without losing herself? She'd seen what wealth and power could do to people, how easily they consumed everything in their path. Yet, with William, she felt something genuine, a connection that was as surprising as it was undeniable. Just as she was settling into her thoughts, a nurse handed her an envelope with her name written in William's handwriting. Curious, Laura found a quiet corner and opened the letter. Inside, William's words were heartfelt and raw, each line carrying the weight of his past and the hopes he dared to nurture for the future. He spoke of his loneliness, of the walls he had built to protect himself, and how meeting her had made him question everything he'd once thought he wanted. "I know I haven't always been honest," he wrote, "but with you, I feel like I can finally be myself. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to start fresh, if you're willing." As she read his words, Laura felt her heart ache. It was as if she were seeing into his soul, glimpsing the person he kept hidden beneath his public image. She hadn't fully realized until now just how vulnerable he felt, and she felt a new understanding bloom within her. William wasn't perfect, but neither was she. They both carried wounds, and perhaps, she thought, that was part of what drew them together. Folding the letter, Laura felt a sense of calm. She knew what she wanted to do. That evening, she visited William's room, holding the letter in her hand. He looked up as she entered, and she saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "I got your letter," she said softly, walking over to sit by his bed. William held his breath, bracing himself for her response. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she continued, her tone gentle. "It means a lot that you trust me enough to be this open." Relief flooded William's face, But Laura wasn't done. "But," she added, her gaze steady, "I need you to understand that I'm not here to fix you, William. I care about you, but I need to know that you're ready to work on us, as an equal." Her words hung in the air, and William nodded, absorbing the depth of what she was asking. "I understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm ready." They sat in silence, each of them feeling the significance of this moment. For the first time, it felt like they were on the same page, willing to face whatever lay ahead together. And though the future remained uncertain, Laura felt a glimmer of hope, a spark that hinted at the possibility of something real and lasting. Over the next few weeks, William's health improved steadily, and he was soon cleared for discharge. The hospital room that had once felt like a prison now felt bittersweet as he prepared to leave. Laura visited him one last time before his discharge, her expression a mix of joy and uncertainty. "So," she said, smiling softly, "what happens now?" William took her hand, his gaze warm and sincere. "Now, I'd like to take you out on a real date. No hospital gowns, no 4 drips, just us." Laura laughed, the sound light and genuine. "I'd like that," she replied, feeling her cheeks flush. But as they stood there, she couldn't help but feel a trace of anxiety. Life outside the hospital would be different, and the challenges they'd face would be far more complex. The night of their first date was a quiet affair. William took her to a secluded restaurant where they could talk without the prying eyes of the world around them. It was a side of William she hadn't seen before, thoughtful, attentive, and surprisingly down to earth. They talked about everything, their childhoods, dreams, and the fears that kept them up at night. For the first time, Laura felt like she was truly getting to know him, piece by piece, and she found herself falling for the man behind the wealth and power. But as the evening wore on, William's past cast a shadow over their night. He confessed his fears of the public scrutiny their relationship might attract, of the people who would question her motives or even try to use her to get to him. "It's not an easy life, Laura," he admitted, his tone somber. "If you stay with me, there will be challenges, things I wish I could shield you from." Laura listened, her heart heavy but resolute. "William," she replied, "I'm not afraid of those challenges. I just need to know that you're willing to face them with me." Their evening ended with a quiet walk under the city lights, the two of them side by side, savoring the simplicity of the moment. And as they said goodnight, William felt a newfound strength. For the first time, he believed that he could truly have a future with her, one that was grounded in honesty and trust. Yet, as they parted ways, a lingering thought stayed with him. Would his world eventually be too much for her? Back at home, Laura felt the weight of the night's conversations. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, and doubts began to creep in. Could she really adapt to his world? Or would it change her in ways she wasn't ready for? The questions unsettled her, but her feelings for William remained steadfast. She reminded herself that relationships were about growth and compromise. And though she feared the unknown, she believed that with William by her side, she could find a way forward. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Laura knew that the choice she made would shape her future in ways she couldn't yet understand. After a blissful few weeks of getting to know each other outside the hospital, Laura and William seemed to have found their rhythm. They embraced the tentative steps of a new relationship, sharing simple dinners, long walks, and quiet conversations. William cherished every moment, his heart full of gratitude for this second chance. Yet, beneath the warmth and joy, a nagging thought lurked in the back of his mind. Would their love be enough to withstand the challenges of his world? One evening, as Laura was finishing her shift, she received an unexpected phone call. "Laura Bennett?" came a voice on the other end. It was cool and detached, and Laura's heart skipped a beat, sensing something off. "Yes, this is Laura," she replied cautiously. "I have some advice for you," the voice continued. "Be careful with William Harris. You don't know the real him." Laura felt a chill run down her spine. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. But the caller simply hung up, leaving her with a gnawing sense of unease. She tried to shake it off, reasoning that it was likely someone from William's business world who didn't approve of their relationship. Still, the words echoed in her mind, casting a shadow over her evening. The next day, Laura decided to confront William about the call. She wanted to be open with him, to share her concerns rather than letting doubt fester. When she arrived at his home that evening, she recounted the conversation, watching his expression carefully. William's face darkened, his jaw tightening as he listened. "I'm sorry, Laura," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "I suspected this might happen. There are people in my world who don't want to see me happy, especially with someone outside their circle." He explained that over the years, his success had bred envy and resentment, and that certain individuals believed his personal life should remain controlled and strategic. To them, "I'm a figurehead, a tool to maintain influence and wealth. And anyone who threatens that stability, like you, becomes a target." Laura felt a surge of anger on his behalf, but she also felt a pang of anxiety. She hadn't fully grasped the extent of his reality, the invisible forces that seemed intent on meddling in their relationship. "William, is this going to be our life?" she asked, her voice wavering. "Constant interference, people trying to tear us apart." He took her hands in his gaze filled with regret. "I wish I could promise you otherwise, Laura, but my world, it's complicated. I can protect you from most of it, but I can't shield us from everything." Laura's mind swirled with questions. Could she truly handle the pressures of his world? Was her love for him strong enough to weather these storms? She wanted to believe it was, but the uncertainty weighed heavily on her. William sensed her hesitation and felt a surge of desperation. He didn't want to lose her. Not over this. "Laura," he murmured, "if you're willing to face this with me, I'll do everything in my power to make it worth it, but the choice is yours." They sat in silence, his words lingering between them like an unspoken vow. Laura's heart told her to stay, but her mind urged caution. She knew she couldn't make this decision lightly. After a long moment, she finally spoke. "I need time, William, to think about what this means and whether I'm truly ready." He nodded, understanding. "Take all the time you need. Just know that I'm here, waiting for you." In the days that followed, Laura wrestled with her feelings. She missed William terribly, but the warning call had left her shaken. She began researching his past, trying to understand the world he was part of. She read articles, watched interviews, and pieced together a picture of a man driven by ambition, a man whose life was as complex as it was powerful. The more she learned, the more she realized how different their lives truly were. Yet, amid the scrutiny and doubts, one thing remained constant: her feelings for William. She couldn't deny the depth of their connection, the warmth she felt when she was with him. But she also knew that if she chose to be with him, she would have to be strong enough to face whatever challenges came their way. And that, she realized, was a decision only she could make. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, Laura finally came to a decision. She picked up her phone and dialed William's number, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. When he answered, his voice was filled with hope and nervous anticipation. "Laura," he said, and she could hear the tension in his tone. "William," she replied, her voice steady, "I've made a choice. I want to be with you. I'm willing to face whatever comes our way. But I need to know that we're in this together, that you'll be honest with me, no matter what." Relief washed over William's face, and his voice was filled with gratitude. "I promise, Laura. No more secrets. Just us, facing this together." They spent the rest of the night talking, sharing their hopes and fears, building a foundation of trust and understanding. And though the future remained uncertain, they both felt a renewed sense of strength, a belief that their love could withstand the challenges ahead. As they hung up, Laura felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She knew the road would be difficult, but she was ready to face it by William's side. With their relationship back on track, William and Laura began to navigate the challenges together. Their bond deepened as they spent more time together, finding joy in the simplicity of shared moments. But as they moved forward, remnants of William's past continued to haunt them, making it clear that certain issues needed resolution. Laura could see it in his expression, the way his gaze sometimes clouded when old memories surfaced. It was as though a part of him was still trapped in a world that didn't align with who he was becoming. One evening, as they enjoyed a quiet dinner, William seemed more distant than usual. Laura noticed a subtle shift, sensing he was wrestling with something unsaid. She reached across the table, her hand covering his. "William, I can see there's something on your mind. Please, talk to me." He looked at her, hesitating before he spoke. "There are things about my past that I haven't fully shared. People, decisions, I thought I'd left it all behind, but some of it still follows me." Laura's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. She understood that opening up about these things wasn't easy for him, and she felt a surge of empathy. "I'm here, William. Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone." Her reassurance seemed to give him the courage he needed. He took a deep breath and began to share pieces of his life that he'd kept hidden for years. He spoke of early business partnerships, alliances that were necessary at the time but had left him entangled in obligations he wished he could forget. In particular, William mentioned one associate, a man who had once been a close ally but had grown resentful over time. Their relationship had soured as William's success eclipsed his own, and now this man was stirring up trouble, questioning William's every move. "He's threatened to expose things about my past, things I'm not proud of," William confessed, his voice heavy. "I'm not the same person I was then, but he won't let it go." Laura listened in silence, absorbing the weight of his words. She saw the pain and regret etched on his face and knew that this was a turning point for him. For years, William had lived under the pressure of his past choices that had helped him rise to power but had left scars. Now he was faced with a decision: confront these shadows head-on or let them continue to dictate his life. The following days were filled with a newfound openness between them. Laura encouraged William to take action, to face his former associate directly. She reminded him that the person he was now didn't have to be defined by the mistakes of his past. William took her words to heart, realizing that he couldn't move forward without confronting what had been holding him back. He reached out to his old associate, arranging a meeting that would finally allow him to close this painful chapter. The night before the meeting, William and Laura sat together, reflecting on everything that had brought them to this point. "Are you ready for this?" Laura asked, her voice soft but filled with confidence. William nodded, a sense of calm settling over him. "With you by my side, yes. I've spent too long avoiding this. It's time to take responsibility and start fresh." Laura squeezed his hand, pride shining in her eyes. She believed in him, in his ability to face his fears and move beyond them. The day of the meeting arrived, and William entered the room with a quiet determination. His former associate greeted him with a smirk, clearly expecting the old William, the one who would have done anything to maintain his power. But William was different now, and as they talked, he made it clear that he would no longer be manipulated by fear or obligation. "The man you're trying to control doesn't exist anymore," he said firmly. "I've learned what truly matters, and it's not power or wealth. I'm done letting you hold my past over me." His words struck a chord, and for the first time, his associate seemed taken aback. William's composure, his resolve, it was unshakable. The meeting ended with a sense of finality, and as William walked away, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He was finally free from the shadows that had followed him for so long. Returning home to Laura, he felt lighter, more at peace. The ghost of his past had been laid to rest, and he knew that his future was now open to the possibilities he'd once been too afraid to consider. That evening, he shared everything with Laura, recounting each detail of the meeting. She listened with a soft smile, her heart full of admiration for the man who had faced his past with courage and integrity. As they sat together, she realized that this was a William she had always believed in, the man who was capable of change, of growth, and of building a life defined by love rather than ambition. Their journey was far from over, but Laura knew they were on the right path. They had faced their first major test as a couple and come out stronger for it. And as they looked toward the future, both of them felt a renewed sense of hope, knowing that together, they could overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. With his past finally behind him, William felt a newfound clarity about his life and his relationship with Laura. The relief of no longer carrying old burdens left him free to focus on what truly mattered. And he found himself embracing the simplicity and peace he had always longed for. Laura, too, felt a shift in their relationship. The honesty and trust they had cultivated together gave her a sense of security she hadn't expected to find with him. But as they grew closer, they both knew that there was one more hurdle to cross: the public world that surrounded William. Laura had managed to avoid the spotlight so far, but William knew it was only a matter of time before people began to notice their relationship. He wanted to protect her from the pressures and scrutiny that would inevitably come. Yet he also knew that keeping their love hidden would only create more obstacles. After much thought, William decided to take a bold step. He invited Laura to attend a charity gala with him, a significant event that would formally introduce her to his world. When he told her, he saw the surprise in her eyes, mingled with a flicker of apprehension. "Are you sure about this?" Laura asked, her voice filled with concern. "I don't know if I'm ready to face all that attention." William took her hands in his gaze steady and reassuring. "I understand, Laura, but I want you to know that you're a part of my life now, and I don't want to hide that. We can take it one step at a time, and if it gets overwhelming, I'll be there with you every moment." Laura smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. She trusted him, and though the idea of facing his world made her nervous, she knew that this was a chance to take their relationship to the next level. The night of the gala arrived, and Laura found herself stepping into a world she had only seen from the outside. The venue was lavish, filled with influential people, the air buzzing with conversation and the subtle notes of a live orchestra. William stayed by her side, introducing her to a select few and guiding her through the crowd with quiet confidence. Laura was initially overwhelmed, but as the evening progressed, she found herself relaxing. William's presence, his reassuring glances, reminded her that she wasn't alone. But as they navigated the event, Laura couldn't ignore the occasional stares and whispers. She knew that people were judging her, trying to place her in William's life. Some were polite, others subtly dismissive. She felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on her, and for a moment, doubt crept in. Was she truly prepared for this world? William noticed her discomfort and gently led her to a quieter corner, his expression filled with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his hand resting on her shoulder. Laura took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "It's a lot to take in," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I knew your life was different, but being here, it's harder than I imagined." William's face softened and he took her hand in his, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You don't have to be anyone other than yourself, Laura. The people who matter will see you for who you are, and as for the others, they don't define us." His words brought her comfort, and she felt a renewed sense of strength. They returned to the event, and Laura held her head high, determined to stand by William's side. She realized that she didn't have to change herself to fit into his world. They had chosen each other for who they were, and that was enough. As the evening wore on, Laura found herself embracing the experience, leaning into the challenges and learning to navigate the new world she was stepping into. When they finally left the gala, Laura felt a mixture of exhaustion and accomplishment. They returned to William's home, where they shared a quiet moment, both reflecting on the night's events. "I'm proud of you, Laura," William said, his voice filled with admiration. "Tonight wasn't easy, but you handled it with grace." She smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her heart. "Thank you, William. I couldn't have done it without you." Their conversation drifted toward the future, and William spoke of his desire to create a life that honored their values and their relationship. He told Laura that he wanted to step back even further from his public role, focusing on the people and causes that truly mattered to him. Laura listened, her heart swelling with pride and affection. She admired his willingness to change, to grow, and she knew that this was the man she wanted to be with. As they sat together, Laura voiced a thought that had been on her mind. "William, would you ever consider doing something different? Something outside of the world you know?" He looked at her, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" She hesitated, then continued. "What if we started something together? Something meaningful. Maybe a foundation to help healthcare workers or support communities in need. We could create something lasting, something that makes a difference." William's face lit up and he nodded, clearly moved by the idea. "I would love that, Laura. It would be a chance for us to build something together, something that reflects who we are and the values we share." The thought of creating a legacy together thrilled him, and he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond his past ambitions. They discussed their ideas late into the night, their excitement growing as they envisioned a future filled with meaning and shared goals. As dawn broke, they finally made a decision. They would embark on this new path together, blending their strengths and passions to create something that would make a difference in the world. It was a commitment to each other and to a life that went beyond personal gain. And as they stood there, watching the first light of morning, they both felt a sense of peace, knowing that they were truly building something real and lasting. They had one more step to take, a final commitment that would seal their future. William looked at Laura, his expression filled with a quiet determination. "There's one more thing I'd like to ask you," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Laura's heart raced as she waited, sensing the gravity of his words. But before he could continue, a phone call interrupted the silence, drawing them back to the present. William glanced at the caller ID, his expression shifting as he recognized the number. Laura saw the concern in his eyes and felt a surge of anticipation. Whatever lay ahead, she knew they would face it together. The unexpected phone call brought William and Laura's plans to a halt. As William answered, Laura watched his face shift from curiosity to tension. After a brief, tense conversation, he hung up, his expression a mix of frustration and determination. "That was my former associate," he explained, his voice tight. "He's stirring up trouble again, threatening to release information that could damage the foundation we wanted to start." Laura's heart sank. After everything they'd been through, it seemed that William's past was rearing its head one final time, testing the strength of their relationship and resolve. But rather than fear, she felt a steely resolve within herself. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze firm. "We knew there would be challenges, William, but this time we faced them together." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparations. William's team worked tirelessly to ensure that his former associate couldn't sabotage their plans. Laura stood by his side, offering support and encouragement as they prepared to go public with their foundation. They decided to hold a press conference, not only to announce their foundation, but to address any rumors or allegations directly. William wanted to step into the spotlight with integrity, showing that he was ready to own his past and focus on a future built on honesty and service. The day of the press conference arrived, and Laura and William stood hand in hand before a room full of journalists, cameras flashing around them. William's face was calm, though Laura could see the tension in his eyes. She gave his hand a reassuring squeeze, reminding him that they were in this together. As he stepped forward to speak, she watched with admiration as he addressed the crowd, speaking openly about his journey, his mistakes, and his decision to build a new life founded on different values. "I've spent much of my life driven by ambition and success," William began, his voice steady. "But in the process, I lost sight of what truly matters. Meeting Laura reminded me that wealth and power aren't the end goals. They're tools that can be used to make a difference. Today, we're launching a foundation aimed at supporting healthcare workers and underserved communities. This is a commitment to the values that we believe in, and it's a promise to ourselves and to each of you that our lives will be defined by more than just personal gain." The room was silent as he spoke, each word carrying a weight that resonated with those listening. Laura felt a swell of pride, knowing that William was finally at peace with his past and ready to embrace a new purpose. When he finished speaking, the journalist bombarded them with questions, some supportive, others skeptical. But William remained composed, answering each one with honesty and transparency. After the conference, as they stepped out into the fresh air, William turned to Laura, a look of relief mixed with gratitude on his face. "Thank you for standing by me," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I don't think I could have done this without you." Laura smiled, her heart full. "We're a team, William, and that's how we'll face everything from this moment forward." Over the next few months, they poured their energy into building the foundation. The project brought them closer, each step a reminder of the purpose they shared. They spent long hours together, planning, organizing, and visiting communities they hoped to impact. The work was challenging, but fulfilling, and they found joy in knowing they were creating something that would leave a lasting legacy. One evening, after a long day of meetings, William and Laura shared a quiet dinner at home. They reminisced about how far they'd come, from the unexpected connection in the hospital to the life they were now building together. William reached for her hand across the table, his gaze steady and full of warmth. "Laura," he began, his tone soft but filled with conviction, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" The question hung in the air, a culmination of everything they had endured and built together. Tears filled Laura's eyes as she nodded, a smile breaking through. "Yes, William. I can't imagine my life without you." They embraced, both of them feeling the weight of their journey lift as they looked toward a future together. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair, surrounded by close friends and family. It was a celebration not only of their love, but of the life they had chosen to create. One rooted in shared values, honesty, and compassion. Standing together, hand in hand, they made vows not just to each other, but to the work they had committed to with their foundation. It was a promise to remain true to the ideals they now held dear. As the months passed, their foundation flourished, helping countless individuals and communities in need. William found a new sense of fulfillment, realizing that he had finally created something of true significance. Laura continued her work in healthcare, her dedication to helping others now enhanced by the resources and support their foundation provided. Together, they were a force for good, their impact reaching far beyond what they had initially imagined. One evening, as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the horizon, William turned to Laura, his face reflecting the peace he now felt. "Thank you for believing in me," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible." Laura smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "We've changed each other, William, and that's the beauty of it. We're building a life that's meaningful, not just for us, but for everyone we're able to help." Their story, once filled with uncertainty and challenges, had blossomed into a journey of love, redemption, and purpose. And as they looked out at the world before them, they knew that their legacy would be one defined not by wealth or power, but by the lives they had touched and the love they had shared. For William and Laura, this was only the beginning of a life rich with meaning, one they would continue to build together, each day, hand in hand. Enjoy the story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Share your thoughts in the comments and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next thrilling episode. See you in our next video. Take care.